After some time preaching in Galilee, Jesus began to gather disciples, 12 of which would become the apostles a year or two later. In this case, the number 12 had spiritual significance, so the apostasy of Judas meant that a replacement was necessary. This turned out to be Saint Matthias, who I admittedly didn't know about until I started this review. Speaking of which, the first big mystery of today's album is how the title 12th Apostle relates to what I just talked about. It will be more relevant when we spotlight the title track, but for now, let's address the elephant in the room. 12th Apostle marks the beginning of the third Jandek era, or what some like to call the second acoustic era. Unlike the earlier sections, this one completely lacks electric guitar and bass, and there are fewer collaborators than ever. The final track of Lost Cause suggested that Jandek was out of electric recordings he wanted to show us, but it's anybody's guess why everything had to change from there. There may not have been anybody like Eddie or Wesley to keep the blues element going, unless Jandek was simply tired of that. His amplifier might have been broken if it was his in the first place, or perhaps 12th Apostle was a deliberate effort to recapture the simplicity of his earlier albums. But even if it was, something you can't ignore is the guitar. It's another combination of plucking and strumming, but it's the tuning that has not been heard before. Since nobody that I know of has figured it out, it is difficult for me to talk about, especially since it sounds like Jandek frets the guitar quite a bit. For now, I'm guessing at least two of the strings are somewhere around E-flat and A-flat. Back when the album was released, this must have been intriguing, because when Jandek played the atonal way, the acoustic guitar kept a similar tuning throughout much of the second era. He really does have his preferences if it took him until 1993 to switch it up. Anybody calling it an untuned guitar at this point should be an object of ridicule. I know how mysterious Jandek's lyrics can be, but I was honestly unaware of how much 12th Apostle pushes the envelope. It was quite surprising when I totally drew a blank for some of these songs, so this has clearly been an instance where I paid more attention to the delivery of the words than their meaning. The song Walking kicks off the album with the words, My, it's your iron side, which I think is memorable, but I always assumed Ironside only meant something to the artist himself. I recently looked it up and could not make much sense of the results, so Jandek must be choosing his own meaning. Indeed, much of the record sounds like the same stream of consciousness method. Anyway, I still think Walking is one of the better tracks. From what I can tell, it describes someone who's self-reliant and down to earth, since he doesn't need a horse or a car, and he's not afraid to follow his dreams as long as he's honest with himself. Native Land has also been a favorite of mine. Its opening lyrics are rather vague, but when he mentions the liquor store and the kite, it sounds like symbolism that could relate to the title. Perhaps the track is most notable for alluding to someone else's music, which you can hear just after the 2-minute mark. Seth Tissue noticed that the line about living in a vault is basically a response to something similar in It's Alright Ma, I'm Only Bleeding by Bob Dylan. I may not know that song too well, but I'll just assume living in a vault is one way to describe a preoccupation with money. With the closing lyrics, Jandek almost gives the song a racial component with those colors he mentions. Black and white are self-explanatory, but you might have to use your imagination with green and purple. Anyway, I would say Out in the Rain has stuck with me the most over the years. To be honest, the whole album reminds me of rainy days, and this track might have had something to do with it. It starts with the narrator being incarcerated, but he quickly escapes through the ceiling, I think. He tells someone they won't see him again, since he obviously has to leave the area. From there, the lyrics are pretty cryptic, the title refers to a flower pot, and perhaps the foreign land out in the sand is someplace in the Middle East where the narrator plans to stay. You may not hear much about this one, but it's worth a few listens because of its catchy rhymes. However, in terms of substance, the next song is the most impressive. The Gone Wait has a special place in my heart because I once wrote down the lyrics as I listened just to pass the time while I waited for something. In the song, the wait might refer to all the time the narrator has left on this earth, which would mean walking that faithful mile is about entering the afterlife. Until then, the narrator pays a lot of attention to the wind, whether he's just watching its direction or listening for hidden messages. Later in the song, it sounds like some mysterious being telling him it's time to go.
It's gone, you know where you must go. Hey, can't you find a better way? Let your fortune find you gone away.
Overall, the narrator does not do much in this song, so it might be about some old guy in a nursing home. The whole thing makes me glad to be young and capable of analyzing a Jandek song. Now, starting at track 9, the music features a reverb effect that has been there from the beginning, unlike 6 and 6, and it was brought back for other albums in the third era. Also, I could be mistaken, but the guitar tuning sounds slightly different on this part of the record. If you want to know which of these songs to pick, look no further than the title track. Originally, I thought the lyrics were from Jandek's perspective, but now I think he was trying to put himself in the apostle's shoes. Apparently, somebody died, but continues to live, which surely makes the song about Jesus. Now, the apostle tries to keep his heart open to his Savior, despite some difficulty in communicating with him.
They say it's not easy to talk to you. I think I'll try.
Also, note the final lyric, which is reminiscent of the song Down in a Mirror. In my more recent reviews, it's almost a tradition for me to pick new songs to like, so this would certainly be the latest one. Finally, I feel like I should mention Whiskers, since it was the first Jandek song with slide guitar, despite that not becoming a common technique in his music. Let's just say he's no Duane Allman, so the slide gives his atonal playing a rather dizzying effect. Lyrically, the song starts with Jandek making fun of some guy's facial hair, which could have been like an update on the janitor, but the disorganized second half keeps Whiskers from being a highlight. Still, the guitar playing is enjoyable for a while. I know I only discussed about half the songs, but keep in mind that 12th Apostle is an atmospheric Jandek album. When I reviewed the Later On album, I hinted that it was good driving music, and it's the same deal here. The lyrics often don't tell much of a story, so I mostly enjoy it when it fills the room rather than the brain. While I usually play this record all the way through, obviously some stuff does stand out, and I think it was a sign that Jandek was here to stay throughout the 90s. 12th Apostle might be a bit overshadowed by the next two records, but they certainly had their roots in this.